I went to work one Saturday in 1995. And just to put it into context, we were really, really busy as a department dealing with different murders. We seemed to have a murder inquiry after murder inquiry. And I used to work with a bloke, I'll call him John, that's not his proper name. I used to work with a guy called John, and he was a top fella. And we were like that, you know. We worked a lot together. He liked a few beers. He was a bit of a comedian, and we got on famously. And we were so busy that we said, right, the next murder inquiry we're assigned to, we'll drag the body just outside of Leicestershire so they can deal with it and not us. Which, you know, but that got us, that sort of humour got us through some difficult times. And I went to work one Saturday, as I say, in 1995, and my detective inspector called me in the office and said, look, Gasky, you better sit down. And I thought, what have I done? And he said, well, there's no easy way to tell you, but last night John took his own life. And he actually took his own life 100 yards across the border into Warwickshire.
Where did you grow up?
Born and bred in Leicester.
Leicester.
Yeah.
What was home life like for you? Mum and dad about? What was that growing up like?
Youngest of three. By the time my mum was 21, there were three of us, so we didn't have a lot. My dad was a gas fitter, and he wasn't around a great deal, mainly because he was working, and then at weekends, to make ends meet, he'd be doing jobs on the side. So, but yeah, pretty average sort of upbringing, average sort of school kid. My big love was playing football, so I played a lot of sport. Reasonably academic. I know that's difficult to believe, but reasonably academic, and yeah, pretty standard. No great shakes upbringing. Yeah.
What was school life like for you? What did you excel in? Anything particular was your thing?
Again, it was football, and because I was good at sport, it made me sort of semi-popular amongst my peers. So I was okay in that respect. And by that I mean I didn't experience any bullying or anything like that. And I had loads of mates purely because I was sort of looked up to because of my sporting prowess.
You did quite well with football. How far did that go for you?
It took me to playing for Leicester City youth side, and I thought I'd arrived, you know. I'm on that road to stardom, so to speak, and yet that was quickly replaced by alcohol, women and tobacco. Not necessarily in that order, but that, as I got into my teenage years, that sort of dominated my life, and I'm not saying I would have made the grade, I probably weren't good enough. Incidentally, I was told I wasn't tall enough. At 16, I was 5'4", and then I had a growth spurt and ended up 6'2". But there you go.
Yeah. So, did you leave the family home at some point? What was that like? What was the transition for you out of home?
I think during my late teenage years, I got into some wrong company really, and I'd started to go to the pub. And I'd got some mates who were quite tasty individuals. I learnt how to street fight, which didn't really do me any favours. But the people I hung around with were probably less than positive.
What took you into that world, do you think? Just you were quite popular, or?
Yeah, I think I just drifted in it. Yeah. You know, I was using pubs from way before what I should have been. So 13, 14, I was in the pubs, and just mixing with other fellas who were probably not the best influence for me.
Was alcohol the drug of the time then?
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah, and obviously the more you could drink, the higher in esteem you were held.
First jobs, what did you go into?
From leaving school, I first of all went into roofing, would you believe? And before the days of health and safety, I was on a domestic roof, and I went to step off the roof onto some scaffolding that wasn't there. And I ended up in the front garden of this house, and I broke both my legs. So that was the end of my roofing career. And that does explain why I am terrified of heights. Yeah. So after that, I went into, in the late 70s, jobs were not easy to come by. So on a Saturday, I got a job at W.H. Smith's, which everybody's heard of. And so I worked there on Saturdays, and in college holidays, because I went to do some A-levels, in college, sixth form college holidays, I sort of worked part-time, and then I drifted into what W.H. Smith called the Management Development Scheme, and I was going to be potentially the youngest branch manager in the company's history. I'd have been 20 years old, and we had an internal, like a diploma in retail management, and I whizzed through that. I'm the sort of character, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And I whizzed through that, and I was offered the manager's job at Lincoln, and I'd have been 20. But I worked with a good mate who joined the police force, and 2 years before I joined, and he left W.H. Smith, joined the police, and he kept saying to me, "You need to come and join the police. Join the police." And I kept saying, no. And then he sort of taught me round, and I applied for a role with the Leicestershire Police, and I got that role. So, of course, I've got this job offer on the table of youngest branch manager in W.H. Smith's history. And I said, no, and I kept stalling, and they said, well, why? And I said, well, I don't want to leave Leicester. And anyway, of course, once I got accepted as a police officer, I then went and told my boss the reason I've not accepted is because I'm leaving to join the police. So in 1981, I became a member of the Leicestershire Police.
Wow. Would you say that, I mean, we're talking about policing that is 40 years ago.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
It's changed. But when you policed, was there a type of person that excelled in the police? Were you that guy? Did it just fit with you?
I think it did. There's an old saying that it takes one to catch one. And I mean, as you've quite rightly said, policing was very different then. And I didn't spend a great deal of my police career in a uniform role. Initially, I was drafted into a team called the Vehicle Squad, because in the early 90s, car theft was rife. We're talking about the XR3Is, XR2Is, and Cosworths, all that. And car crime was rife. But I got seconded into this department mainly because at that time, and the irony is, I was a local uniformed police officer for where I lived in South Leicester. So I was the Bobby on the bike, literally. But of course, I knew all the bad lads locally. So my personal detection rate was like double what the force average was. So based on that, I got drafted into a plainclothes role working in the Vehicle Squad. I did that for 2 years. And then I was due to come out of the CID and go back to a uniform role. But on the day I was having my leaving do, I was told, you're not leaving, you're going to be staying, and we're going to put you in the general CID office. So my leaving do became a staying do. So we still had a few beers with the boys, and I stayed in the department.
I want to push into this a little bit and explore your policing career, because it's relevant to your story, I think. And your police career spanned how many years?
35, yeah.
And which areas of policing were you involved in, just as a list?
Oh, crikey. Once I came out of uniform, I went into vehicle squad, 2 years. Then I went into general CID, and then I left that department because I had personal issues. I had a breakdown, and that made me leave that environment. And then for 2.5 years, I worked in crime intelligence, which was a semi-uniform role, but it meant I had no shifts or anything like that to do. And then I got headhunted to go back into a plainclothes role, and I worked initially in the vice squad, and that morphed into the sex and dangerous offenders unit, and I did that for 10 years. So the last part of my career, I went into police anti-corruption. So I investigated my colleagues, and then once I retired as a warranted officer, I went back as a civilian and ended up working in counter-terrorism, which I did for 4.5 years until I hung my truncheon up, so to speak, in 2015.
Wow. Did you have a truncheon at the start?
Little wooden truncheon, yeah. Still got it.
Have you?
Yeah.
With a leather sort of...
You've got it, yeah. That was it. That was your protection, yeah.
Just whacking with that. So obviously we know each other well. You're someone who I think, I only know a few people like you, maybe a couple, who you can tell anything and it doesn't faze you.
No.
There's really not many people like that. And that's come from a very long exposure to the good, the bad and the ugly in life, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm interested to hear maybe some of your first encounters, some moments in your policing career that really challenged you or spoke to you, but also, because some of the guys listening to this will be active police, how do you develop resilience in that space, mentally, physically, emotionally? So maybe we'll go through some stuff, but can you remember some of your first encounters that really sort of blew off that veneer, that sheen of that kind of bright-eyed kid? It was suddenly like, wow, this is the real world.
Yeah, and that's very true. I mean, looking back, I was very naive. I was 21 years old, very naive. And the second day in the job, we got sent to a car crash, and which was a fatal car crash. And this lived with me for ages. And it's something that I suppose I've had to deal with and still dealing with to a certain extent. But I turned up, brand new cop, out the box, and to this scene of carnage, and there was a car with its roof collapsed, and in the back was a 6-year-old little boy, and he could see that his mum and dad in the front were clearly dead, and we couldn't get him out. And that haunted me, and for years it haunted me. And it certainly had an effect on me. But you grow up quick. You do grow up quick. And I think, like we said at the start, policing is very different today.
Yeah.
And back in those days, the answer to everything was, let's go and have a beer, we'll be all right. And there was no sort of counselling or any welfare, not like there is now. But you do grow up very quickly. And for me personally, there's so much I had to learn as well, because I had to learn conflict resolution for one, because I'd gone from this environment of being with my mates, and we used to go out on a Saturday night as teenagers. We used to go out and it would be sport to have a punch up. You know, that's what we used to do. I'm not proud of that, but that's what we did. So all of a sudden, I'm a police officer. So I had to walk away from all my friends. And I lost every single one of my friends. I knew I couldn't hang around with them. But I took that into the police, and I had to learn conflict resolution. And with what you're dealing with, and it really does open your eyes, because, you know, some of the things I just never thought I'd be faced with, ever. You know, being personally threatened with weapons, being assaulted, stuff like that, I never thought would happen. So you do develop a very thick skin very quickly. Nowadays, there are sort of, like I said, counselling, and there are things available to help you get these things out there. Back in my day, it was never an option. And if you were perceived to be weak, you know, you weren't really fit to do the job. There was no room for any weakness. So you sort of bury it and you go, I'm not bothered. But, you know, you give this persona of I'm all right, but that's very different when you're on your own and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you're waking up sweating and you're transported back to where it was, reliving it, exactly.
It's interesting, because let's say you arrive at a scene of an accident. You've got a job to do, haven't you?
Yeah.
Secure the scene, all the steps you do to make it safe and treat whoever's in need. But also there is that human weight on you, and I think it's interesting because guys in the military will serve a period of time, come out, but police, that's almost every day in, day out. It's consistent.
Yeah.
Does it take a human toll to? Because I looked at wanting to be in the police. And what put me off was I felt like you're almost attending someone's worst moments every day.
Yeah.
How do you carry that? What effect does that have on you?
It didn't do me any good, to be honest. But I tried to blank it out, right. And I sort of relied on other things. So I self-medicated, I suppose, to cope with it. Mainly through alcohol, and that's how I self-medicated to cope with things. And of course, you just had this persona of, Gasky's one of the lads, he's a top bloke, and he's the banter and all that. Yeah. But we all wear masks, and I certainly wore several masks.
Can you remember any times? We could do loads of stories on the darker side of things, but times where you've gone, yes, like there's a conviction. There's justice, there's a process that's worked. Was there moments in your policing where you really, that's great? Loads. And to sit back afterwards, when you know, it's gone from putting somebody's door in, so to speak, and go through that process where they've gone to court and justice has been done, and the feeling of that is, you think it's worth it. That sort of gets you up in the morning, knowing that you're going to make a difference. And to make a positive difference, and there's loads of stuff, to make a positive difference to somebody else's life. I like to think I did. So, I made a difference. You faced a lot of different pressures policing in your time. You may be out of it now, too far to comment, but what would you say are some of the pressures on current police that they go under or go through?
I think there's this fear of violence. I think it just appears we seem to be in a very violent world, and and to go to work expecting violence, and I think they do to a degree. You know, I know 1 or 2 cops now, and not only do I feel sorry for them, because I'm thinking, are you really going to do this for 30 years plus? Or are you going to do it for 5 years and then disappear? I think there's that fear of well, nobody wants to get hurt, do we? You know, so I think there is that fear.
Do you think there's been an increase in how angry people are and how quick it gets to that point? I don't know, but just in the last 10 years, say, I feel like I've noticed a real change in how quickly people get to that boiling point.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, and I think that's spot on. We seem to be getting more and more short-tempered, and it's about me. What about me?
Yeah.
And I think we're becoming very, very selfish as a society across the board.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. So a really, really varied career you've had. When you left, were you able to put it down in one go, or did it take you time to readjust?
I suppose it's at times, certainly in the early days, it was, what am I going to do? Because I don't know anything else. But I remember thinking to myself, surely 35 years-ish of working in that arena, surely that's not going to suddenly, that's it, and not be used for good. Surely not. Surely. And that's what my prayer was. I was praying, look, come on, Lord, surely you could use my police career to see more fellas in the kingdom, because I've dealt with mainly men, of course, throughout my career.
So, and this is interesting because I want to touch on where you are today in your life, but we've also got to just dip back into the dark a little bit to get perspective of that, because you weren't always a saint, a Christian, or, you know, there's been some dramatic shifts in your life.
Absolutely.
Like, huge. When did you start to feel like you were losing your grip on your life?
Well, I'd had no faith upbringing at all as a kid, and when I went into the police force, on the rare occasion that I went to church for the mandatory baptisms, weddings and funerals, I just found it completely irrelevant. And I just thought, this has no relevance to my life, because it was all, people were nice, and I just thought, oh, 8 hours ago somebody was trying to kill me in the city centre. So these people are deluded in church, and I must admit, I thought men in particular in church were weak and needy and just out of touch with life, and church had no relevance to me at all. And I'm not.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I'm not saying I was anti.
Yeah.
I wasn't anti. It just never had any relevance to my life. But yeah, I was in the roughy-tufty world of policing, and then I just couldn't see that sort of shift into becoming a church person.
Yeah. With the culture it's wrapped up in, for a guy like yourself who would sit in a room like a churchman and read the culture of it and what's not being said, it's wrapped up in meek and mild language, in soft, shepherdy, pastory type, gentle music, banners, flowers, culture. It's all very
You got it.
gentle.
Yeah,
And it's very jarring to a bloke who doesn't live that way.
absolutely.
And it's not very inviting either, because why would you want to be like that?
No.
So you really ran into that sort of church culture and just thought, this is not for me.
Yeah, and you know, and even when I did come to faith, I'll be honest, I struggled with it, and I thought I don't fit, and I still don't fit, but I'm quite happy with that, because I know my identity in Christ now. It took me a long time, but because I thought church would try and turn me into becoming a nice man. And I'm not a nice man. I'm a lot of things, but I'm not a nice man.
Yeah, nice just seems so placid and nondescript. Like, we don't want to be aggressive, angry men.
No,
we also
no.
don't want to just be nice, beige. That's like a beige.
Yeah.
Terrible. Interesting. And it's really interesting to explore it with you. So you tell us, how did you end up where you are?
Well, here I was in the CID, and you can imagine the banter. I was a heavy smoker back in the day. I was an 80 a day man at my height. 80 a day.
What was your chosen packet? What were you smoking?
I was into pretty much anything really, but John Player Special,
Right.
Number 6, Embassies, you name it, Mayfair, because they appeared and they were cheap. Because it's, you know, but and smoking became like a substitute for meals as well.
I mean, and this is an era where you can be in the car smoking.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because people watching that are, you know, 20 have not grown up in.
No.
I remember flying to Portugal and people smoking at the back of the plane.
Well, if you think in an interview environment with a suspect, you know, I smoked, my colleague smoked, the suspect smoked, the solicitor smoked, the social worker smoked, the appropriate adult smoked. So after a 45-minute interview, we had to pause it because you couldn't see each other. You know.
That's equivalent of smoking like what, eight cigarettes.
Oh, I was a big, heavy smoker.
Big addiction.
Yeah.
Sorry, anyway.
Yeah. So here I was in that sort of environment, and the banter, a big drinking culture, completely different to how it is now. And I'll be honest, in that plainclothes arena, I used to think I'm above the law. And so drinking and driving was common. It's not big, it's not clever, but I've done it. So I'll just, if I just explain it as the world revolved around Paul Gasky. You know, I was the managing director of the universe, and that's what I was. And I went to work one Saturday in 1995, and just to put it into context, we were really busy as a department dealing with different murders. We seemed to have a murder inquiry after murder inquiry, and I used to work with a bloke, I'll call him John, that's not his proper name. I used to work with a guy called John, and he was a top fella, and we were like that, you know. We worked a lot together. He liked a few beers, he was a bit of a comedian, and we got on famously. And we were so busy that we said, right, the next murder inquiry we're assigned to, we'll drag the body just outside of Leicestershire, so they can deal with it and not us, which, you know, but that got us, that sort of humour got us through some difficult times. And I went to work one Saturday, as I say, in 1995, and my detective inspector called me in the office and said, look, Gasky, you better sit down. And I thought, what have I done? And he said, well, there's no easy way to tell you, but last night John took his own life. And he actually took his own life 100 yards across the border into Warwickshire. So our puerile comment had come to fruition, and only I knew that. And it kicked something off in me where I really started to have a look at myself, and I thought, why didn't he say something?
Yeah. Did you know? You didn't know
No, I
anything?
haven't got a clue.
Wow.
But then I thought, well, did he say something? And I wasn't listening. I hadn't picked up on it, and I couldn't cope with losing my mate, and I just didn't know what to do. I had nowhere to take it. Like I say, there was no official counselling, anything like that, and I got nowhere to go with this. And here I was one minute as this successful, beer-swilling, banter-clad detective, and yet really, I just felt like a frightened little boy, and I wanted to run away. That's how I felt. And the way it manifested itself, it was grief, and it manifested itself in outbursts of anger. And
At home and in the workplace?
I wouldn't say I was angry. Yeah, I don't think I displayed. Probably my wife would disagree, but I wasn't physically angry. I didn't have to be. But thinking back, I could destroy her with words, which is probably as bad, if not worse. So at this time I was married. We'd got 2 daughters. They were 9 and 7 at the time. And I'd never been much of a dad in the sense of going to school plays and parents' evenings and all that. I was a father in that I provided, but I didn't do the sort of dad things because I was too busy. So here I am, I've lost my mate and I can't cope with it. So, like I say, I just wanted to run away. So I just decided I didn't want to be married. So I just told Sue, my wife, that I don't want to be married anymore. And of course, I dropped that bombshell and I left our marriage. And ironically, Sue had become a Christian in 1995. And I distinctly remember the night she came home from an event in Leicester and she told me she'd given her life to Christ. And I just thought, well, I'm even lower down the pecking order. So she's got a whole new load of friends. All these people at church that I thought were weak. And she's got a whole new load of friends. And she'd been to church groups with the kids, the mums and tots groups and things like that. But that night, I saw a distinct change in her, and I didn't like it. Wow. I didn't like it. And initially, I made it known. So when I was in the company of her new friends, her new church friends, if I say I tried to wind them up, then I tried to wind them up. I was trying to get a response all the time. So, Anglo-Saxon, I use every word of Anglo-Saxon to try and wind these people up. And I was known in the church as the bloke who occasionally speaks between swearing. That's the sort of reputation and I quite like that, to be honest. I loved it. I used to just love winding them up. But, Sue could see me going rapidly downhill. She could see it. And she confided in, obviously, people from church and in our vicar, local vicar.
That wound you up, did it?
That wound me up, yeah. Why are you talking about me? Yeah. But she did confide in them. And our vicar had said to Sue, I'll go and talk to your husband. And Sue kept saying, no.
Not a good idea.
No, the time's not right. And to be honest, I was in such a position that I don't care who it was, had somebody come without my invitation, I would have probably assaulted them, because that's where I was. I was in a real pickle, a real mess. So I announced that I'm leaving. And Sue, bless her, is taking our girls to a pantomime. And I said, when you come back, I won't be here because I'm leaving. And because she'd promised the girls she'd take them to the pantomime, she still took them to the pantomime. But on the way out, she nipped into the vicarage and said to Tony, the vicar, now's the time. And there I am, loading my car with my worldly possessions, and this little clergyman appears, and I think, you're all I need. And I couldn't get rid of him. Excuse me. He wouldn't go away. And I tried every word of Anglo-Saxon that I knew to try and get rid of him, and he just would not go away. So eventually I said, look, Tony, when I'm sorted out, I'll come and talk to you. And he said, right, now you've said that, if I said to you, I'll come and talk to you, and I didn't, you'd call me a hypocrite. I said, yeah. He said, so you've got to come and talk to me. And I said, I will. I had no intentions of ever seeing him again. I just wanted him gone. And he left. And I left. I drove away with my 2 bin liners full of my goodies. I got nowhere to go. So I sofa surfed. I slept in the office at work now and again, slept in my car. Nowhere to go. And I was in a mess, just in a mess. And I was drinking heavily. And the only way I can describe it is the only time I wasn't in any pain was when I was asleep. But I couldn't sleep due to anxiety and everything else. And so I tried to induce sleep any way I could. And if that meant drinking really heavily, I did. And of course, eventually, that has no effect. So I decided to dabble in substances you don't buy across the counter at Boots. So I did that. And that had no effect. After a while, all it did was get me into debt because I was spending money hand over fist that I hadn't got. And
Still trying to work at this point?
I was still working. And how I kept my job, I don't know. I really don't know. Some days I would go in and I'd be in a real mess. But, you know, oh, Gasky's a top man, you know, he's all right, he is. It was all an act. All an act, and I got away with it. And I made the decision that if I'm permanently asleep, I won't be in any more pain. And it was as simple as that. And people have said to me since, but surely, you know, you got kids and you've got a job and blah, 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 blah. You don't think about that at all. I was really blinkered in my thinking, and it was just about me. This is about me. This is what I'm going through. So I thought, if I'm no longer here, then I won't be in any more pain. And it's as simple as that. So going into 1996, New Year's Eve, going into 1996, I decided to end my own life. I decided to end it. And didn't tell anybody. I didn't leave any notes. I just decided that the world would be a better place if I wasn't in it. So I decided to jump from a railway bridge in the centre of Leicester, which is quite ironic because I said earlier I'm scared of heights, and I am. I'm terrified of heights. But
what made you pick that?
Because I knew I'd do a proper job.
Right. There's no comeback from that.
There's no comeback. And, you know, sadly over the years I've seen people who have jumped, and there's no other way to put it. You do a proper job. So that's what I decided to do. So the irony again was, it was New Year's Eve, people are happy and celebrating, and I just felt wretched. So there I am in the centre of Leicester, and I climbed onto the railway bridge near to Leicester train station, which is hidden from the road as well. So I knew it's hidden from the road, so I knew nobody would stop me. So I climbed onto the wall, and I was one step from going over. And then I became aware of an inner voice, which I wrote off as conscience at the time. And in my head, this voice said, just remember how angry you were when John took his own life. Don't do it. And it didn't so much bring me to my senses, but it made me get off the wall. And I was trying to process what's going on. And I wandered around for 3 days. I was just in a mess. I wandered around. And I found myself at the door of our local vicarage. And I knocked on the door. And Tony answered the door and said, come in. And I couldn't talk for an hour. I was too upset, sobbing. I just couldn't talk. And eventually he said to me, what are your plans? And I said, I haven't got any. He said, well, do you want to go home? And I said, how can I? You know, I'd been away for, I don't know, a couple of months, 2-3 months. And I'd started divorce proceedings. So I'd seen a solicitor, Sue had had a couple of letters. And so I thought, I can't go home. So he said, well, we'll see what happens. So I wasn't man enough to go to my own home and speak to my own wife without the help of this little clergyman who held my hand. And he is a little fella as well. He's retired now, but he's a giant in my eyes, but a little fella. And we went to my home, and Sue allowed us in. And I said to her, well, I need to tell you that I was going to end my life. So she's straight on the phone to our GP. Our GP is a member of our church, so I think you can see where this is going. And I'm dispatched to see our GP. And I spent a long time with him. I feel so sorry for the other patients because I sort of dominated his time. And he said to Sue, he needs an urgent mental health assessment, and it's so serious that if you can't take him to hospital, I'm going to get an ambulance. So she poured me in the car. That was a mess. She poured me in the car, and on the way to the hospital, I said to Sue, I said, look, if they section me or try to admit me, I'm going to kick off. And she said, we'll worry about that when we get there. So I arrive at this mental health unit at one of the hospitals in Leicester, which is now closed. And I'm sort of, right, here we go, come on. And as I walked down towards this unit, a member of staff appeared, and he was massive, this big fella. And I looked at him, and even then I was thinking, well, if I go in with as much violence as possible, this is what I'm thinking. And I'm not a hard man at all, but I'm thinking if I go in with as much violence as possible, I might be able to take him out.
Surprise him.
Yeah, surprise him. And a door opened opposite, and another big fella appeared, and I think he was his twin brother, and he was huge. And I looked at them both, and I thought, perhaps not. And then two more members of staff appeared, big fellas, and I thought, this is not one you're going to win. So I walked through the doors of this assessment unit, and to cut a very long story short, I was diagnosed with suffering from severe clinical depression and PTSD through some of the stuff I've sort of witnessed over the years. And the parting words to me from my sort of professional, call him a head doctor, but his parting words were, if you want to save your marriage, you've got to tell your wife exactly what you've done. And I thought, I can't tell her. I thought, how can I tell her why we were £15,000 in debt? Because most of that had gone up my nose. How can I tell her about just saying a way fixture? You know, how can I tell her? How can I tell her? How can I drop these bombshells? But I knew I had to. So we got home, and bearing in mind, I'm now on the sick from work. I've been prescribed some medication, and Sue was told it would take 2 weeks for the medication to kick in, so don't leave him on his own. And she didn't. And she didn't leave me alone for 2 weeks. You know, bless her heart. And I think the reason was because she allowed me back into her life. And I say this all the time. In human terms, my wife is a hero in my story, in human terms, because she and I did put her through hell, I did. But she allowed me back, despite the bombshells that I dropped. And the reason why, because she said, when I left, she dreamt that I was working for a Christian organisation. She dreamt that I was singing in a Christian rock band. Done that as well, by the way. There's a couple of CDs out there somewhere. She dreamt I was preaching in church. And she was prompted to read, I think it's 1 Corinthians 7, and it's questions about marriage. And she was prompted to read that, and I'll have to paraphrase it, but it said, if your unbelieving husband leaves, let him leave in peace. You never know, wife, how you handle this might not only bring him back to you, but bring him back to me. And she clung on to that. She did. She clung on to it. And she was saying to people at church, he's going to come back, and he's going to be a man of God. And in their defence, some of them said, get rid of him. Yeah, and I understand that. But of course, I'm on the sick from work, and we're going through this process. And bearing in mind the bombshells that I've dropped, I've got a lot of brownie points to earn, lots of them. So one evening, Sue said to me, we're having a bring and share evening at the vicarage, will you come? And I thought, oh no, please. I'll do anything but that. Please, no. No, please, no. And she said, well, will you come? And I couldn't say no. I had no leg to stand on. So I said, right, I'll come. But on the proviso, the first bloke who says something, I'm going to take him outside, vicarage or no vicarage, and I'm going to give him a slap. And she said, nobody will say anything. I said, they will. Yeah. Of course they will. Because throughout my life, whenever I'd made myself vulnerable, somebody took advantage. Because while I was being treated for my depressive illness and everything else, I had regular counselling sessions for a year, and my past was unpicked. And there were things that had happened in my life that I thought I'd forgot about, but clearly affected me. And so I said, they will say something. So we turned up at the vicarage, and I met some Christian men. And every single person watching this can learn from this. Nobody judged me. Nobody. That's a note to self, isn't it? Don't judge anybody. Nobody did. And it took the wind out of my sails. And I worked out that these Christian men who I thought were really weak, in those 2.5, 3 hours, I worked out they were some of the strongest men I'd ever met. And I had a really pleasant evening. And we went home, went to bed, and I went to sleep with some pleasant thoughts for a change. And then I had what I can only describe as my worst nightmare ever. And I'm not easily intimidated. And I've been around a bit, as you can tell by my good looks. But I was having a nightmare. And in my nightmare, I was being pulled between two forces. On one side, it was just black, nothing. And on the other side, it was a tiny speck of light. And I was being pulled between the two. And it felt like if I didn't give in to one or the other side, I would be torn in two. That's how it felt. And apparently I was screaming out, thrashing about in bed. I was asleep. And Sue is aware there's something going on here. So unbeknown to me, Sue's praying over me. I didn't know. Sue was praying over me. And after what appeared this titanic battle, where I wasn't really bothered which side was going to win, if I'm honest, but after this titanic battle, the darkness let go of me. And I was propelled towards this light, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then I was released into this pure blinding light. And I woke up, and I sat up in bed, and I was drenched with sweat, and I was confused, trying to work out what's gone on. So Sue decides, now's the time to fetch a copy of the Why Jesus booklet that she'd hidden in her sewing basket downstairs. So she's out the bedroom, and as she left the room, I became aware of another figure in our bedroom. And in the gloom, in the corner of our bedroom, a figure held out his hands towards me and said, Paul, just trust me. And I knew it was Jesus. I just knew. Now, you'd think being a cop, give you a better description. He's about 5'10", he's got I can't, and it's not a cop-out, excuse the pun. But I felt a pure peace, a peace that I cannot explain, but I knew it was Jesus. So at 1:10 a.m. on Sunday, the 3rd of March, 1996, my life was transformed like that, because I knew Jesus was alive. Didn't know anything about him, but I knew he was alive. And that started me on this journey. And it's taken me through 3 years theological training, where I was licensed by the Church of England as an evangelist. I didn't ever want to be ordained as a vicar, for the simple reason I've got to be true to myself, and I'm a pretty transparent character. And I thought, how can I be a vicar and have my own church and my own congregation and parish when there are people who get on my nerves. And that's the truth. So, but the Bishop of Leicester, in his infinite wisdom, licensed me as an evangelist in 2010. And of course, my journey with Christ started at that precise moment in March 1996. And it's taken me to where I am today. And there's so much has happened since. Because I had to go back to work. You know, I had to go back to that CID environment of banter and all that. And to be fair to my colleagues, I could have been a little bit more subtle the first day I went back into the office. Because I announced, you can imagine, it was all busy, buzzing, phones going, everything else. And I walked in and I just went, right, gentlemen, since I've been off, I've met the risen Lord Jesus Christ. And they said, Gasky, since you've been off with a mental health problem, we're not quite sure you should be back. And they took the mick. They did take the mickey. It was only banter. But just a couple of examples. I went in one day and my desk was covered in a purple cloth with a candle on each corner, like some altar.
That's first class banter, really.
Oh, yeah.
It's very high level.
And we had a tannoy system that was audible in the car park of the police station where I worked. And I got out of my car one morning to be greeted by about 1,000 decibels of onward Christian soldiers. But they just took the mickey. And of course, they tried to explain it away. Some said I made it up to save my marriage. And if I'm honest, at that precise moment, my marriage didn't mean a lot to me. That's the truth. Some said that it was a result of the medication I was on. And I get why they would say that. But it never said anywhere on my prescription that a likely side effect was a visit from Christ. Didn't say that. Some said I was hallucinating. I understand why they would say that, but all I can say is I never hallucinated before, or indeed since, but I get why they would say it. And some said that we had a burglar in our house, but there was no method of entry, nothing was stolen, plus the truth is, had it been an intruder in my house, he wouldn't have got out alive, that's a fact. But I guess why they would say it. But all I could say to my colleagues was, you'll see a different Paul Gask. You know, this is no flash in the pan, and I'm going to do my utmost for the remainder of my days because I want people to experience what I've experienced. Because I take Jesus very seriously, and he saved my life, literally saved my life. He restored my marriage. He's enabled me to get the respect of my girls. And I've got 5 amazing grandkids that I would have never met. So I owe Jesus everything. And like I say, that's why I end up working for Christian Vision for Men, although that's a story to itself. But I came out the CID, I made the decision I didn't want to do it. And again, I can see where God has been in my journey all the way through, because I very quickly thought, I don't want to be in this environment anymore. It just was unhealthy. And so I told my boss I was coming out of the CID, to which he said was, but I've got people knocking my door down for a job in this department. So my answer was, give it to one of them then. And I applied for a role, like I said earlier, in crime intelligence, which, if I'd got the job, would have meant no shifts, no weekend working, regular hours, which would have given me time to restore my relationship with my family and also explore my faith. Because I knew Jesus was alive, didn't know anything about him, didn't know anything. So I had to start right at the beginning. And incidentally, my first Bible was a children's Bible, and I'm not ashamed to say that. It got lots of pictures in it as well, which I found helpful. So that's what I started with. But I applied for this role working in crime intelligence, and I was one of 3 applicants for this job. Now, in my career, I'd never had to go through an internal interview process. So from that respect, the other two potential candidates were far more experienced in that process than me. So I turned up for the interview and I sat there in front of the interview panel and they said to me, we're just going to let you know that the other two candidates withdrew their applications this morning. That's God. And I got that job. And that enabled me for the next 2.5 years. I had regular hours, was able to do the Alpha course, which I did twice because I didn't really get it the first time, and rebuild my relationship with my wife and family. And then I got headhunted, but I was in a much better place 2.5 years later. And of course went back into working in different squads. And I was just my attitude completely changed. And stuff that I got involved in, which I thought, it was all right at the time. I just didn't want to do it anymore. I just felt convicted not to do it. And I'm not saying I'm perfect, because I'm not. I'm far from it. But as I always say, I know I'm not the man I should be, but I'm so thankful I'm not the man I was. And I'm not immune to the garbage in life, because my eldest daughter, Amy, she had twins. One didn't make it. So as a family, that was, probably one of the hardest times of our lives as a family. And had I not had God to take it to, I don't know where I'd have gone with that, because it was just a tough time for our family. So we're not immune to the garbage in life. That's the point I want to make. It's not all wine and roses and sweetness and light and all things bright and beautiful. It's not like that. It's following Jesus is tough. It's tough. And you have to look for him in all things, and it's not always easy.
Wow. That's an amazing testimony, mate. And it's beautiful now seeing that restoration as well. Family, kids, extended family. What would you say to a bloke who's in that pit, and perhaps as you were, you know what that's like? What would a message to that guy be?
Well, there's another answer. There is an answer. I've tried pretty much everything, and it's this like God-shaped hole. I do believe there's a God-shaped hole, and we try and fill it with all sorts of things. That could be booze, sex, rock and roll, whatever it is. But the answer is Christ. So I would say to anybody who's in that place, you owe it to yourself to have a look at this. You owe it to yourself. So I would urge anybody, get yourself amongst some fellas who are going to stand with you and see you through whatever you're going through, because believe me, you will. But it's about trust and about being open and about being honest. And, whatever it is somebody's going through, if it's in the light, it's no longer in the dark. So whatever it is, get it out into the light. Just get it out.